Hello there. At the beginning of the season, I asked if you would help us by leaving a 5-star rating and a personal review wherever you listen to True Tales from Old Houses. And I want to say thank you to everyone who took that to heart. Your positive ratings and reviews help potential new subscribers know that True Tales from Old Houses is worth a listen, and sharing each episode with a screenshot or link helps people find the show. So please keep those shares, 5-star ratings, and personal reviews coming. Let's work together and get more people involved in old house life and invested in preserving their built environment. Thank you. In today's episode, spooky season continues with 4 separate stories of the unexplained, including one from me. Do ghosts really exist? I don't know. Go ahead and listen to today's stories and decide for yourself. But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and you're listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Hello and welcome back. I've got a fun episode for you today. Every October here on True Tales from Old Houses, we share lighthearted ghost stories. The first one dropped in October of 2018, and it was called Debbie's Little Piece of History is Haunted. It's still one of my favorites. And honestly, sharing ghost stories in October started off as a whim because that was my first year producing this show after recording a ton of content in 2017, most of which I discarded. To be clear, in no way do I blame the people I interviewed. That was all on me. Anyway, during 2018, I was struggling to find my voice, but I was determined to be a serious podcaster, bringing only the hard-hitting and helpful stories to you. Then October rolled around, and Debbie's story seemed like a good fit. I published it, and listeners loved it. So the tradition of sharing spooky stories in October continues. As a side note, I also stopped taking myself so seriously after Debbie's episode, and I think the show is better for it. Okay, before we get into today's stories, I want to offer a quick thanks to our Season 8 sponsors, Sutherland Wells, Preservan, and the Window Course. All of these sponsors are handpicked to be relevant to you, so please take a look at what they offer and enjoy our coupon codes too. Those codes are right in the show notes. I also have a few short announcements. First, I mentioned during the last episode that there won't be a Q&A segment today due to time constraints, but please do continue to submit your old house or DIY questions through the contact form at truetalesfromoldhouses.com. That form is always available to you, even if the show is on a break, because I'm continually working behind the scenes. And sometimes it does take a while to find the right person to help me answer your questions. Next, I want to say congratulations to Anthony, who won the signed copy of Restoring Your Historic House, the Comprehensive Guide for Homeowners, written by Scott Hansen. And thank you to everyone who entered that giveaway. And Anthony, I hope you love the book and that it's useful to you with your old house projects. And speaking of books, I don't normally announce guests in advance, but I'm doing it today because there is another book involved. I don't purposely keep upcoming guests top secret. It's more out of superstition than anything, because sometimes guest interviews fall through or things happen that require me to shift the schedule. It's just easier if I keep it all a surprise. But this time is a little different because my next guest is author David Giffels, who wrote a very heartwarming and funny book about his experience rehabbing a giant wreck of a house that he and his wife bought in Akron, Ohio. Some of you may already know David Giffels and his books, but the book I'm talking about is called All the Way Home: Building a Family in a Falling Down House. It's available in hardback, paperback, and on Kindle, or it might even be at your local library, and I wanted to give you a chance to read it before the episode drops. Some of you might like to do that, but it certainly isn't a prerequisite for understanding or enjoying the interview. The book was actually published in 2009, and there might be a few things that David would write differently today, but the ups and downs of the story will likely resonate with many of you. And David and I had a great time together during the interview. I'll drop some links to his book in the show notes. On a different topic altogether, I was recently a guest on the Upcycle Canada podcast. I am rarely a guest on someone else's show, and it was a real treat. I kind of like not being in charge. I'm used to asking the questions, so it was a different experience being in the hot seat. Dave and Jen started the Upcycle Canada podcast during the pandemic, and it has blossomed from there. They describe it as the perfect podcast for makers, side hustlers, dreamers, and earth-friendly listeners. Dave asked me a lot of excellent questions about my projects here at Blake Hill House and this podcast, and I shared quite a bit of behind-the-scenes stories and information that I've never put on the blog or mentioned here on True Tales from Old Houses. So I invite you to check out that episode and the rest of the Upcycle Canada podcast too, which I will, of course, finish the sentence with me. I'll link it in the show notes. And finally, if you want to join me for some True Tales from Old Houses field trips, there are still a few tickets left to the live audience event at Susan and Will Brinson's house in the Hudson Valley on November 12th. So grab those before they're gone. I've also nailed down the week I'll be in Boston to see the Christmas tree in Boston Common. I'll be there sometime between December 5th and 9th, and I'll get back to you about the exact day if you want to join me. And there is still room on the tour to Montreal, Quebec City, and the Canadian Maritimes that I am hosting next August 10th through the 20th. I'll put links to the Hudson Valley tickets and the Canadian tour info in the show notes, and I will update everyone about the Boston meetup in the newsletter and on Facebook and Instagram. If you are not a newsletter subscriber, but you'd like to be, go to truetalesfromoldhouses.com/newsletter. Okay, that's it. That is all I wrote. That's all I had to tell you. Ghost stories are up next. This first story comes from Kathy, and whether you believe in the supernatural or not, I think we can all agree that the mama bear instinct is real.
Hi, Stacy. My name is Kathy. I live in Falls Church, Virginia, just a few miles outside of the Washington, D.C. area in the suburbs of Northern Virginia.
Well, welcome, Kathy. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much.
We've been on Instagram together for a long time, and when I first got on this call, I said, don't I know you? Which I don't, but I guess we feel like we know each other. That's a good start, right?
Right.
All right. Well, you are here today to talk about, I guess, supernatural visitors. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I live in a 1920s bungalow. It's a really sweet, charming home, but a bit on the small side. So we have been renovating our house over, almost 20 years. And at one point, we renovated the upstairs bedrooms. We had to move out for a little bit. And then when we moved back home, my daughter, who was 3 at the time, started waking up in the middle of the night. And she would call for me and she'd say, Mommy, there are people in my room. And so I was trying to explain to her, oh, you're having a dream and there are people in your dream and let's go back to sleep. And so I would lay down with her and she'd fall right back asleep. But this happened multiple times over several weeks. And one night she woke up, same thing, Mommy, there are people in my room. And I said, it's a dream. And I laid down with her and she wouldn't settle down. She just kept tossing and turning and sitting up and laying down and tossing and turning some more. And so finally I said, Mary, what's the matter? Why can't you settle down? And she sat up, pointed to the end of her bed, and she said, Mommy, don't you see those people?
Oh my goodness.
Why are they in my room? And oh my gosh, my heart sinks. Even just mentioning it now, just remembering it, a chill went through me. And so I scooped her up. We went out of the room, shut the door, and she slept with me that night. And the next morning, I called our priest and told him, and I had him come and bless our house with holy water. And he said, he 100% believes in spirits and that they probably meant no harm, but if they should visit again, just speak to them as if they are, they are in front of you like regular people and just say, thank you for visiting, but you're scaring my daughter and please don't come back. And I never had to test that. I never had to actually speak to the spirits because after he blessed our house, we haven't had those visitors again.
That is so wild. Oh my goodness. I hear the stories over and over again that kids are really sensitive. Kids and pets are really sensitive to that sort of thing. And so you called your priest. That's probably a good move. You're also the first person I've ever spoken to who's called a priest to bless their house afterwards. And that's interesting.
Well, my family is Eastern Orthodox, and that is a tradition in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so you would typically have your house blessed every year anyway. And after the renovation, my priest had mentioned a couple of times, I know you renovated your house. Do you want to have it blessed? And I was kind of like, oh, that means I have to clean the house and, have someone come over. And so I kind of put him off. But then once we had those visitors, I said, okay, I think it's time for you to come and bless the house for us.
Wow. So how long ago was that, you said?
It was about 10 years ago. And we've never had anything like that happen since, before or since.
Yeah, that's great. So no even good feelings about like, oh, something's here, but it's pleasant and
No, I haven't felt anything. Although after the priest said that, he believes in spirits who, you know, that people would come and visit, I did have the feeling after that it wasn't random. Like then it didn't seem like random spirits, that perhaps they were spirits that were somehow connected to us and our family.
Hmm.
But I have no reason to believe that. I didn't necessarily think that before. Well, I didn't think there were spirits before until my daughter had that experience. But then once our priest said that, they meant no harm and just tell them thank you for visiting, I felt like, oh, maybe it just seemed to me like they had some connection to me and my family.
Right. Instead of the house.
Instead of the house. Exactly. Right.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. This is always a fun episode every year to hear everybody's stories. They happen throughout the year, not just in October, but we share them in October. And I'm really thankful that you were here. So it was really nice to meet you.
Thank you, Stacy. You as well.
This next story comes from Rachel. Rachel and her siblings had a number of unexplained experiences in their childhood home in Western New York.
Hi, I'm Rachel Gaylord, and I grew up in Gowanda, New York, which is about 33 miles south of Buffalo. Currently reside in a little town south of Providence, Rhode Island. And I'm here to share ghost stories with you. I'm so excited.
Spooky things is what you wrote on your form.
Spooky things, for sure.
That's funny. We just had a little conversation about Gowanda, which is not super far from where I live. And when when Rachel says it's tiny, it is tiny.
One stoplight kind of town.
It really is cute. And we have, Rachel and I also have an acquaintance. Maybe some of you who are listening have heard of them. It's the Kimball House, and they're doing a really big renovation there.
Yes, we're really excited to watch the progression of it. It shows a beautiful, beautiful home. It's the light that they're breathing into it and the energy that they're bringing to the process that has kind of made the whole community really sing, for lack of a better phrase. They're just tickled to see that somebody would choose our small town and see the beauty and the value in it. So it's really fun to watch.
That's great. All right, well, let's get back to you. Why don't you just start telling us about those spooky things?
Goodness. Okay. Yeah. So the house that I grew up on is on Buffalo Street, and it is one of the, as Western New York people will say, the main drag that goes through our town. And there are lots of older homes on our street. In fact, my neighbor's house was used in the Underground Railroad. So we've got a little bit of that history there. I also want to acknowledge that likely the land that I grew up on was inhabited by the Senecas of the Iroquois tribe. And so I think, that's important to acknowledge that, and kind of adds another layer to the area.
Absolutely.
What is neat, my house was built in 1925 by a couple named Dr. William and Doris Muir. He was a dentist by trade and an avid outdoorsman. In fact, our attic still shows remnants of his outdoor activities. So fishing, hunting maps, I think my dad finally got rid of all the old animal heads that I just integrated over the years, but he actually built a dark room in our basement because he could also, in addition to bringing his hunting photos to life, he could actually bring the x-rays to life that he used, and ran the dental practice out of what is now my parents' bedroom.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is kind of fascinating. What's neat about him, he also was an avid gardener and actually had some prized and award-winning roses, we were told. And so a very old home. In fact, one of the oldest photos that I have of it is like there's a Model T Ford out in front, and which is really cool, craftsman style, which is weird, but craftsman lines of a really neat garage. And he built a fence, he built a fountain and a pond in our backyard. and very lavish landscaping for the time period. All that to say, my parents purchased the home in 1985, and this was after his children sold it because sadly, Mr. Muir passed away in the backyard of a heart attack while tending to his beloved garden. So, kind of set the scene there.
That's sad, all that work. But, maybe he died happy doing the thing that he loved.
I think that's the thing that we'd like to cling to. So over the years, I think there were just things that were kind of normal for us, but abnormal when friends would either come to visit or refuse to visit, that we kind of thought maybe there's something here. So it's common to walk into our house and it's not just like an old drafty house. There are temperature changes, like cold zones, I would say. The house is beautiful inside, but still kind of has a creepy factor. And it was something that I didn't realize until I went to college. I always found myself in what used to be the waiting room of the dental office was our family office computer room, when you had a desktop back in the computer days. And you'd be just kind of hanging out there and constantly feel like you're being watched. And it's a creepy feeling, like in your house, constantly turning, not seeing anything, wondering, did you catch something out of your eye? My friends would always say the same thing. Didn't always love slumber parties. The house was too weird, too creepy. My first experience with a ghost at our house, I shared the primary bedroom with my sisters. And so my little twin bed faced the door. And we used to sleep with it open. I woke up in the middle of the night and woke up to a figure standing in the doorway.
Oh.
It terrified me at first because it wasn't recognizable. We'll say that. And I'll never forget it. Just a shorter woman wearing a black, lacy shawl. Lacy shawl covering face, hair, dark clothes. And she just stood there. And then I just started screaming for my father and sitting blood curdling scream.
Oh no. How old were you?
I was 6 or 7. So wasn't just the nightmare thing. And he had been downstairs. So a downstairs lamp was on in the living room. So it wasn't I'm seeing shadows. They're completely backlit. There's no way. We're creaky stairs. I would have heard everything. So that was my first, we'll call it a run-in. And to this day, I still can't sleep with a door open in my bedroom. Bedroom door, closet door, they all have to be shut.
Right. Oh.
Cannot do it. I think another time, I used to have this, I still have it, a old silver jewelry box that my grandmother had gifted me. It was obviously hers. And it never really worked well. You kind of had, you had to try to wind it up and hold it, hope that the mechanisms would work to, keep it in place. You also had to lift the lid, and it also had a prong so that the music would start playing. Well, obviously from old age, not even just lifting the lid would work. You kind of had to mess around with it for a little bit. So I never kept it wound up, always kept the lid on. And there was just one evening I was sitting in my room trying to fall asleep. And I just remember running through my mind, thinking about things, very anxious and stressed about what teenage girls think about, outfits, my crush not liking me. And all of a sudden, what was one of my closets, I just hear the ping, 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 ping. And I paralyzed doesn't describe fear, because I knew as a rational human being, okay, 1, I didn't keep it wound. 2, that's in the closet. That's right here. Nobody's in this room with me. You have to physically lift it, the lid, mess around with it. What's happening? I mean, maybe a malfunction, but none of this seems right.
It just gave me a chill.
Yeah. There would be times growing up too that, we had an old attic, of course, and it had a drop down ladder with a trap door.
If you're going to have a creepy attic, that's the kind of attic to have, right? With a drop down door.
I mean, so yeah, you have that, and you have we never touched any of the Mr. Muir's belongings. So the hunting maps, and, there's cobwebs, and it's the standard eaved, exposed rafters and beams and, odds and ends hanging everywhere. And yeah, creepy's the right, and throw in the animal heads, it just, and it had the lone, light bulb.
With the string you had to pull, you have to walk in the dark to get to the string.
That is exactly correct. And it's leading into, so, we'd sometimes go up in the attic thinking it was cool for showing our friends or whatever else. And my dad would always yell at us because he would pull out. He's like, why is the attic light on? Which one of you kids were up in the attic? And we'd be like, well, none of us were. He's like, you literally had to be. Someone has to physically go up into the attic, messing around the light bulbs. And they were always on, and it would always be at weird times too. Like he would wake up in the morning and it was on. But like he knew, one, nobody went into the attic.
Right.
Towns, and it was overnight. So like if the night before, he's like, okay, I'm turning off all the lights. We're all good. Lights are off. And then in the morning, the attic lights on, and he's just could never explain that. So it was kind of an impish thing. Things would go missing, like moved around from rooms, music dials would turn on the radio, things like that. But you just kind of learn to be like, how does that happen? So it was always kind of fascinating. And another story, I used to keep my bedroom door locked when I would go to my job at McDonald's, and I would lock it from the outside because I had to keep my sisters out so they wouldn't take my, clothes and makeup and stuff. And it was directly over the living room. And only 2 of my siblings were home that day. Again, old house, you can hear every creak in the wood floors. And so my brother hears like heavy footsteps going across, my room. And he looked over at my sister. He said, Rachel home? I thought she was at work. My little sister's like, no, she's definitely at work. So they're kind of like, we're just hearing things, like what's going on? So when I came back, they had asked, did you have like a friend stay over? Like what's going on? There's like noise upstairs. I'm like, I didn't have a friend stay over. I'm like, the door's locked. I went to work. No one's up there. And so another instance, we'd also hear things in my closet. My brother and I, the back of the closet shared a wall, and things would always fall down in the middle of the night.
Huh.
We would hear like very heavy thuds. And so if we were brave enough in the morning, we'd go to look and nothing, but very clear, very distinct. You could also hear it like downstairs. So there's just all these kind of odd happenings.
So your parents still live there, right?
They do.
Okay. So have they experienced anything, or was that all reserved for the children?
So what's fascinating is I think, we would say like, Dad, like there has to be, like, we all feel this. This is weird. Like, he's like, stop being so sensationalistic. Like, no, nothing's happening. You kids have wild, active imaginations. I think that he had to sell to himself that he could explain away, it must have been the kids, or other things must be happening. Because I don't think my stepmom would want to live there long term. And the running joke was like, you never wanted to walk upstairs by yourself or be the last person to, and I think that's a general fear. Sometimes we just work up, but in my house, it was like prevalent, and she said she just got used to the idea over the time that there likely were spirits among us. And she just didn't try to pay it any mind, which I don't know.
So maybe they have and maybe they haven't, but at this point, it's just where they live and they're happy there and everything's good.
That's right. And it's interesting because my brother was always poo-poo the idea. He'd say like, oh, you girls you're just being a little dramatic. And I'll never forget it. It was one early morning. It was in between college semesters and summer. And my brother's this year or two older than me, a big football player. He's braver than anything. Never believed the ghost stories. So it was like a weekday morning, probably I'd say around like 8, and I'm like trying to sleep in, and I just hear him shrilly like scream and just kept saying, get away from me, get away from me. And I was like, oh, okay, must have had a nightmare, whatever. Didn't hear anything else, so I just went back to bed. So we woke up a few hours later and I saw him in the kitchen, and I said, Pete, so what happened a little earlier? You have a bad nightmare? You're screaming like a girl. What was the problem? And he said to me, like deadpan, looked right at me. And he said, I think that I saw a ghost. And I said, oh, which one? I'm like, describe. And he said, well, there was this like short lady, and she had like this lace shawl over like her face, and it was black. And she just started walking towards me. He's like, I was kicking the covers, and that's when I was like, screaming at her. And I was like, oh, like that's the same one that I saw. So what do you think? He's like, well, maybe I was just dehydrated and tired. And I go, I don't think so. You described her perfectly to a T. So it was like interesting.
Yeah. Have you Oh, your siblings or your parents ever looked into the history of the house to see if there's anything that corresponds with that?
Other than Mr. Muir passing away in the backyard, it has been shared with us. We live so close to like Lilydale. And so if anybody's familiar with that or wants to look up the history of Lilydale, but great community. And they do have a lot of mediums. So, there have been a few times over the years we'll go.
Hold on. Let me pause for just a second. Will you just quickly explain what Lilydale is? Because it's a little confusing for people who are just not from here.
Yeah. So Lilydale is a community in Cassadaga, New York, which is, I would say, about 45 to 50 miles southeast of Buffalo. It's close to, so there's a lake, Cassadaga Lake, and then there's also Chautauqua Lake, which is a little bit larger, has a Chautauqua Institution on it for those that may be in the know and are interested in older summer communities.
And to give some context for Chautauqua, I'm sorry for interrupting you. That was where, sadly, unfortunately, the attack on Salman Rushdie just happened this summer. So that kind of
That's correct.
Gives you a little bit of perspective on where it is and what kind of community it is. So pardon me for interrupting you, but I think it's been launched into more of the public spotlight after that happened. So back to Lilydale.
So Lilydale is very close by, and Lilydale was another summer community at first that was basically an enclave, a very inclusive enclave for those who had alternative beliefs that weren't always accepted in society. And so that could mean not necessarily the Church of the Occult or the House of Satan, but mediums. It was more of a spiritual community, like inward, introspective healing and visionaries and whatnot. And it was a place they felt safe. They built little summer homes. Reminds me of itty bitty bungalows, community over on Silver Lake, and similar in mind.
Oh, yes. I just did an interview with Brad 2 episodes ago, or 3 episodes ago, I guess now.
So they have the small summer cottages. And it's still a very active community. They have an active membership. You, as a member of the public, can go. You can certainly set up an appointment if you wanted to speak to a medium or participate in some of their programming as well, whether it's sound bath, spiritual guide, or a reading, all of that, which I think is just kind of, interesting and fascinating.
Sure. So you visited a medium?
My older sister did. I did not have the same experience. And I think, it's kind of like a good therapist. You have to keep trying out different mediums. But my older sister had, and that medium had shared with her, you're followed by a few spirits. And so my sister obviously thought this was kind of cool and kind of like claim to fame. And we were like, oh God, is it about the house? Like, which one did they elaborate? And they didn't fully elaborate on the spirits themselves, other than my sister was just followed and she had to make sure she cleansed her spirit so that they wouldn't glom onto her, which is take it with a grain of salt.
What does that mean? Do we know what that means?
I guess it's just this energy field. It emanated from her, and so spirits would, negative or positive, would seek her out or follow her. And maybe I wouldn't say they were so far off.
Yeah.
Also, my younger sister had a coworker, so we chit-chatted, pleasantries exchanged. Certainly didn't go deep, if you will. And my little sister said one day that said coworker came up to her and said, "Did you know that your house is haunted?" My sister's like, "Hey, excuse me? We don't talk like that. Like, I don't chat with people."
Yeah, didn't even know each other very well.
Right. And she was very skeptical, and she was like, "Oh, really? Okay, tell me." She's like, "Well, you have 3 spirits that haunt your house, and I'm going to tell you who they are." And she's like, "Okay." Still looking skeptical because she didn't want to like oversell or lead her into anything. And she said, firstly, the one spirit is a tall, older man. He died in your backyard.
Okay.
Second spirit, she said, is this older woman. Didn't elaborate more, just said older woman. Just they kind of wander about, flip in and out of, I guess, the spirit worlds. And the third was a young boy who died tragically in a fire. She said he's stuck between the worlds. And so he goes up and down the street to various houses and does just impish things.
Interesting.
When we think about like lights were left on, things would be moved. We knew we had placed them there. dials would change on the radio. All these kind of things. You're like, is that the little guy?
That sure sounds like a little kid thing to do, doesn't it?
Yes. So those are some of the stories. And I think there's like more that my siblings, we've all had some interaction.
Wow.
That I shouldn't realize. You don't know until you aren't living in a house that has some haunts and some spooky things until you leave it. So now I'm no longer checking over my shoulder all the time because I don't feel like I'm being watched. Who knew?
That's funny. Well, before we wrap up today, there's two things I want to do. First, I realize this is an audio podcast, so most of you aren't going to be able to see this, but there might be some video coming out at some point, at least little snippets. And we did not acknowledge the fact that you're wearing a spider on your head.
I'm wearing a spider on my head.
And I feel like we should say something instead of just being like, oh, Rachel just shows up and she normally wears spiders on her head. So
maybe I do.
Maybe you do.
I think, you have to embrace, life in New England and really lean into character here. Hence like the very spooky colonial decorations.
Yes, another thing Rachel has is a beautiful Halloween mantle. So hopefully we'll get a little bit of that video up and you'll be able to see her because it's quite festive. I like it. But the other thing I wanted to mention besides the spider on your head is that you have an Instagram account and it's called A Cape Cod Renovation. I just said that without your approval.
Totally fine.
Okay, good.
And full disclosure, I am not as good of an Instagrammer as you, Stacy, or others out there. I'm always like, I should have filmed this. And I'm,
That is perfectly okay.
I've been working on, I'm currently refinishing some wood furniture. So.
Oh, good. And we all use Instagram a little bit differently. So there's no one right way, or there's probably a wrong way, but there's not a right way to use Instagram.
I can't keep up half the time anyway, so it's fair.
No. Thank you so much for coming on and telling your experiences. That's pretty wild.
You're so welcome.
All right. Well, cheers to good energy.
Yes. And to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to pause here to say that True Tales from Old Houses continues this season because of the generous support from our sponsors. Once again, we are supported by the Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog. The Window Course is a step-by-step do-it-yourself window restoration program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. The Window Course offers all of the start-to-finish video instruction you need right now, and Scott is one of the best teachers in the business, and I have learned so much from him over the years. The weather is getting cooler now, but it's the perfect time to take the Window Course in preparation for next spring and summer. With the rush of summer house projects behind you, you can really take your time to learn the steps and gather the tools and supplies that you'll need. The content is self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or the Training Package, then you'll get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. And even better, the Window Course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and I've got an active coupon code to share. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use our coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Sutherland Wells, maker of exceptional polymerized tung oil finishes since 1965. All of the Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil native to China has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone. And unlike polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, making it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills. Last summer, I started adding Sutherland Wells products to my oil primer for added flexibility and penetration, and I am so pleased by how smooth the top coat of paint looks on my window restoration projects now. Currently, I'm priming my stair balusters with the same combo of oil primer and tung oil. Specifically for pre-coat, I use Clarabelle's, but Sutherland Wells has an entire product line for whatever you're working on right now. Siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it. To learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's WELLES, sutherlandwells.com, and to save 10% on your first order, use our coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Preservan, a unique preservation franchise opportunity developed by longtime window restoration pro Ty McBride. The mission of Preservan is to save the future by preserving the past. So what exactly is Preservan? Well, what if you could go to work every day on your own terms while also doing something meaningful within your community? What if you could start a home service business without owning complicated and expensive tools that are difficult to transport to and from job sites? The team at Preservan will train and support you to operate a Preservan business in your community, equipping you with the tools you need to perform sustainable wood rot repairs and build your own team of epoxy techs. You'll receive the playbook for a proven preservation business, exclusive access to ever-resin epoxy products, business software, and all of the marketing, advertising, training, and technical support you need. Owning a Preservan franchise offers the perfect opportunity for work-life balance while serving your neighbors and community in a recession-proof industry. You'll get to work your own hours and spend the rest of your time in ways that are important to you. To learn more about becoming part of the Preservan family and their mission, go to Preservan Franchise, that's spelled Preservan, preservanfranchise.com/truetales. The third story today comes from Leanne. People write thank you cards and send them through the mail. But how do you say thank you if you're a ghost?
My name is Leanne Wisman, and I live in a circa 1889 Queen Anne Victorian in Southwest Pennsylvania.
Hi, Leanne. So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I should have said so good to see you again because you were on an episode, I believe it was August of 2020, and you were talking about Flow Blue.
Yes.
And you're back, not to talk about Flow Blue this time, but you're here to talk about some, I don't know, do you call them spirits, ghosts, energy? How do you identify this?
We just call them happenings, and we really just refer to them by their names, who we think they are. So we just call them, we talk about them like they're just people and they're here.
And they're in that current house, the house that you're in right now.
Yes.
Okay, so I would love to hear your story. Go for it.
Okay, so it's a very short and sweet story. A couple weeks ago, we had the great-great-granddaughters and great-great-great-grandson of the second owners of our house come out to visit.
Wow, that's special. That's really nice.
It had been a couple years in planning, but, things were weird in the country, and so they finally made it out here, and they went to visit the graves of their family, and they stopped by the house. We had a nice visit. They were here for maybe an hour or two. I gave them a tour, and then that kind of sparked, like, hey, I haven't done house research in a while. Why don't I hop on and see if I can find anything new? So that night, I had hopped on my laptop. It'd been shoved in my nightstand for months. I hadn't been on my laptop in forever. So I got on it and I turned it on. And Sadie, my daughter, has been obsessed with keyboards. She just wants to type on keyboards, push the buttons. So I turned it on and she started pushing all these buttons. And she did something weird to the desktop where all the icons disappeared and it was just like my background of like the ocean. And I was like, Sadie, what did you do? So I shut down my computer and I turned it back on. And when the computer turned on, there was no desktop there, nothing. The only thing that came up, huge, taking over the whole screen of the laptop, was a picture of the women who had come, their great-great-grandparents. So Amanda, the second owner of our house, it was a picture of her holding the women who visited their mother as a baby in the backyard of the house. And I couldn't figure out how to get it off. I was hitting like escape and trying to get the picture off the screen, and I couldn't get it off. So I just did a hard shutdown again, hoping when the computer turned back on, it would be normal. And that picture just came up again, and I couldn't figure out how to get it off the screen. So I just started pounding on the keyboard a bunch of random buttons, and I finally got it to go away. But I just thought it was crazy the day that they came to visit Amanda, their great-great-grandmother, and she was holding their mother as a baby.
That is so weird.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have a file on my laptop called House Research, so all the pictures they've sent me are on that laptop.
Okay. So you already had the picture, but it was just sort of random that it showed up instead of your usual computer background or anything. And on the day that they were visiting you. That is so weird.
Yes. Yes. It just showed up and took over the entire screen of my computer. And it's like it didn't want to go away.
So has anything happened since then? Or was it just kind of like a, hey, tap on the shoulder?
Yeah, I think it was just kind of like a, hey, I know they were here and I appreciate it and it was good to see them. And nothing has really happened weird in our house. When we first moved in, things used to happen very frequently. But as the years, as we've lived here longer, it doesn't really happen much anymore. So that's kind of the first thing, like kind of like thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of happened in a while. So
what kind of things had happened in the beginning?
it was a lot of things with the lights. The lights would flicker. And the first week we were in the house, I woke up in the morning because I heard 2 hard knocks on the wall. It was like knock, knock. And my eyes shot open. I was like, Justin, did you hear that? And he goes, yeah, what was that? And it happened twice in 1 week where we heard a knock on the wall. And we have the push button light switches. So he heard them going like click, 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 click. And he got up to go to the bathroom and he heard the click, click, and the lights were clicking on and off.
Oh, that's super weird.
So I'm like, are you sure you weren't like dreaming that you did this? He's like, Leanne, I swear it was crazy. And then a lot of times he's more, quote, sensitive, I guess, than I am. So weird things will happen or he'll see things and he knows it kind of freaks me out a little bit. So he's like, nothing, just nothing. And I think half the time he doesn't tell me because he doesn't want me to get freaked out when I'm by myself. But yeah. So it just kind of felt like a nice little visit. Like, thanks for having my family here. And I know they were here and I appreciate it.
Oh, that's really sweet. Yeah, that's a great story. I don't think I've ever heard one quite like that. So it must have made you feel kind of good.
It did. It was very heartwarming. It was kind of like everything came full circle. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Leanne, for telling the story and for coming back. I feel like it's just been too short. I feel like we need to catch up again on another topic at some point.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. The final story comes from me, and it's about something that really did happen here in Blake Hill House. Now, I haven't always been a believer in ghosts. In fact, to be honest, I am still not sure that I am. However, this is the first time that I lived in a house like this one, so perhaps I was never really paying attention. But I also think that not paying attention has been part self-preservation because I've been easily spooked since I was a kid, and I was afraid of the dark probably longer than an emotionally healthy person should be. Somewhere in my mid-20s, I started feeling less afraid about everything because I got my first dog. And he was a Husky Malamute Shepherd mix. He looked and sounded terrifying. He also had terrible manners, but he did make me feel safe. And even though my current dog, Millie, is the sweetest people pleaser, she makes me feel safe too. Anyway, several years ago, I gave my friend a tour of Blake Hill House, and she asked me if it was haunted. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I honestly thought she was joking, but she was not. Flash forward, I had a real goosebump-inducing experience at the Maystringer House Museum in Florida in 2019. And I'm going to link the episode where I talked about that in the show notes. That experience working at the Maystringer House Museum kind of turned me into a strong maybe, as far as believers go. But over the years, I've listened to a lot of your stories, and I've come to realize that paranormal activity, well, it comes in various forms, including smells. So I got to go back before I can go forward with this story. For the first couple of years that we lived here, when I really started digging into window restoration, pulling windows out and opening weight pockets and that sort of thing, when I was working on those windows in my basement workshop, every now and then a wafting scent would come through. It wasn't a bad smell. Some of you might have heard this part before because I think I've talked about that smell in a previous episode, but it reminds me, I guess I should say, of my grandpa, kind of a hardworking man smell. It's not a bad smell by any means, but it's not a clean smell necessarily. And as I was working on windows and I would smell that on occasion, that scent would kind of waft in and out. And I never felt afraid, It was always in the basement and it was never anywhere else. And to be clear, I don't actually believe it is my grandpa, but I choose to think about it with positive thoughts because I loved my grandpa very much and I still use his hammer all the time. It is my primary hammer. It's near me for every project. I probably use it once or even twice a week. I guess if you believe that spirits can attach to objects, then it could be my grandpa, but that is neither here nor there. That scent was around for a few years, and then eventually it just went away. And that brings me to the most recent experience. The infamous bathroom remodel. It started over a year ago. I think I wrote the first check maybe in September of 2021. For the most part, I don't do gut renos here at Blake Hill House, and everything here is in pretty good shape. However, the bathroom remodel did require that I pull out nearly 2 full walls and the entire subfloor. We were redoing the plumbing, the electrical, and removing a tub and adding a shower instead, just to bring you up to speed. Back when the contractor was still on board, I agreed to do the demo to save some money. I thought it would be fun because one of the things I wanted to know was the original configuration of the room, including if one of the walls had originally been a doorway. When I peeled back the 1940s wainscoting, I found some original wallpaper. That was the first fun thing that I found. We've had a lot of old wallpaper here in the house, but never anything that I could pinpoint as original. This was original. Pretty neat stuff. I'll put a picture. I think I still have a picture. I'll put that in the show notes. And when I pulled the baseboards off of that one wall that I suspected was once a doorway, I did find evidence that that was true. So that was really neat. I was very excited about that. Then the contractor took over and he pulled the rest of the plaster down in 2 areas. And that is when, I guess I'll say that's when the fun began. So to give you a little bit of context, this contractor was the one who completely screwed up this job and we eventually parted ways. He had a habit of showing up to work very late and not staying very long. So he would do a little bit of work and I would go into the bathroom in the adjacent bedroom every day and tidy up and sort of look at what progress or zero progress, as it may be, he had made that day. So I was up there by myself right after he'd completed demo, I think, with his crew. He had 1 or 2 people working for him. And I smelled the grandpa smell. It was wafting through the bathroom. I hadn't smelled it in the basement for a really long time. In fact, the smell was distinct. I knew exactly what it was, but it occurred to me at that time that I really hadn't been smelling it in my workshop. And as the weeks progressed and I became part of the remodel, I was doing projects myself, I started feeling like I wasn't necessarily alone while I was working in there, in the bathroom. So one day I asked the contractor if he believed in ghosts, and he said, "Oh yeah, completely." He said, "Every day that I am here, I keep feeling like someone is right behind me, looking over my shoulder." He wasn't scared, and I wasn't scared, and we just laughed, and I told him that I had been feeling the same way. And the remodel went on and on and on. And when things started to go very badly with the contractor, we were also having a bunch of electrical work done at the same time. And this was done by a very competent, wonderful electrician. I love them. I'm so happy. But we were rewiring the entire upstairs, having the entire upstairs rewired, I should say. And I had a ton of nervous energy. So I decided to work on a quick supply closet makeover. It's an upstairs closet fairly close to the bathroom we're remodeling, but probably more importantly, it's a straight shot up the wall 2 floors from my basement workshop. Keep that in mind. I did the usual decluttering, wall patching, and finally I painted the whole thing and added shelves, and everything was fresh and new and clean. And when I was done, it smelled like paint and basically cleaning supplies and soap, because that's what I was keeping in there. About a week after I finished, I took a bag of things to add to the supply closet, and when I opened the door, I was hit with the grandpa smell. I am dead serious. And I thought to myself, well, I guess grandpa moved in here. I mean, things were going so crazy at that point. I was resigned to whatever was happening at the time. Didn't care. I wasn't afraid. I was just trying to get through the days. And that smell stuck around for the rest of the electrical work and until the contractor and I parted ways. After the contractor was gone, that was a dark time because that's when I realized that most of his work was not salvageable. And I was going to have to take it out and basically demo the entire room again. And I was pretty angry. I was emotional during those weeks, but I did what I had to do and I got to work. It was really hard work, and I was breaking up the concrete shower pad with a sledgehammer and grinding thin set out of screw heads to try to back the screws out instead of tearing the subfloor away from the joists. There were so many tasks that I was ill-equipped to do with my little T-Rex arms. I'm not a very strong person. I have a lot of determination, not a lot of muscle. I was doing it all by myself. I was borderline bitter, definitely cranky. I started having these experiences where I would lay down a tool like a wedge or a screwdriver or something, and then when I'd reach for it, it wouldn't be there. Now, I keep a neat workplace. I do not like the area around me to be full of clutter and tools that I don't need. So I had cleaned up the room first. I was working on an open floor. I had about 4 or 5 tools that I was using at once. When I'd look around for the missing tool, couldn't find it, then I'd look back in the same spot and it would be there. This happened a lot, and I just figured I was not paying close enough attention, or maybe it was just a real stress or anxiety response. But I also thought in the back of my mind that maybe something weird was going on. And then one day after a few weeks of demo, I was moving very slowly. It was a lot of work. I just got sick of looking for my tools. I was ready to be done. I was tired of hunting around for everything. So I just said out loud really firmly, "This has to stop. I am trying to make things better. Leave my tools alone." And that was it. I finished the demo and my tools were right where I left them every time. Weird, right? And I honestly said that out loud just to cover my bases because, like I said, not sure I'm a believer. I'm a maybe. But I guess it worked. Now, after the demo, I found about 50 pounds or more of debris that the contractor had just left in the floor cavity. And it was plaster and lath, nails, wood scraps, metal, everything. I pulled it all out of there and I used my shop vac to clean out the small bits and the dust. I just couldn't imagine that was healthy for the ceiling below to have that heavy weight in that floor cavity. Then it was all clean and I started leveling the floor with the 2x4s and 2x6s attached to the joists. That was about as far as I got before it started getting really hot upstairs because we don't have air conditioning. A lot of you can probably relate to that. No air conditioning. In the summer, it's hot and humid. So I decided to put the project on hold for the rest of the summer. But when I went up to retrieve my tools, my hammer, my grandpa's hammer, my favorite hammer, was gone. I looked everywhere for it, including the bathroom and the adjacent bedroom, which admittedly, the bedroom was kind of a mess. I cleaned up the bathroom, but not the bedroom. I just figured I left it somewhere else and that it would turn up, but I couldn't find it. So I had to switch to my backup hammer for the summer. If you have a backup hammer, you know it's just not the same. A backup hammer is not your favorite hammer. And several times I went back up to that bathroom and bedroom and I searched the open floor just in case I missed it. Then last month, September, I started working in the bathroom again and I got the plumber back on board after months of not making progress. And I felt finally a renewed sense of, I guess I'd call it enthusiasm. I'd had a chance to process all of my anger and I was just ready to get back to this bathroom remodel, knock it out, have a nice bathroom again. I spent a lot of time in the bathroom thinking through the steps and planning and writing notes and measuring. That same week, I opened the upstairs supply closet and the grandpa smell was back. And I thought, oh my gosh, here we go again. So I went back into the bathroom and I said out loud, again, just to cover my bases, I am not going to be able to finish this bathroom until you give me my hammer back. And then I left. I don't know how many days it was before I went back in there, but when I did, there was my hammer laying in the floor cavity of the bathroom in a wide open spot. And I am not lying to you. I don't know what happened, but I do know that the bathroom is only about 5 foot by 8 foot. And I had searched that open floor cavity several times. And when I finally found the hammer, it was in plain sight. In plain sight. How could I have missed that? So that's my story. And just for fun, right before I recorded this, I checked the supply closet and it currently smells like soap. I guess for now, Grandpa's happy with the current direction of the bathroom remodel. I do think most of the weirdness could be explained away, but the more ghost stories I hear, the less inclined I am to even do that. I'm content knowing that I don't have all the answers, and I am more than happy to coexist with a ghost as long as he leaves my hammer alone. Let me know what you think about my experience. In fact, I would love to hear what you think about all of the stories you heard today. Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Thank you to my guests, Kathy, Rachel, Leanne, and all of the supernatural beings that made this episode possible. To continue the conversation, join me on Facebook and Instagram at truetalesfromoldhouses.com and Blake Hill House. And to learn more about everything we discussed in today's episode, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.